good thing I have a really loud voice. First of all, housekeeping. If you're here for a mayoral debate, this is not it. Down the hall, there are a bunch of mayor signs out in the hallway, and a much more lively looking crowd down there. So, but we're going to get things stirred up here in a little bit, I'm sure. Don't worry when we start talking water. Always a stirring subject. I'm J.D. Strong, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. We're very pleased to have you all here this evening to really tell us, as stakeholders in the Illinois River watershed and members of the public, those that are concerned about this area of the state, what is important to you when it comes to water in the Illinois River, Barren Fork, Flint Creek. We can debate later how you spell Barren Fork because that's been swirling around in the last 2 days. I don't know how that keeps rearing its ugly head again, but no, we're not going to get Ed cranked up on that, right? That's never a fun debate. But if that's all we debate tonight, that'll be great. So I'm going to pretty quickly get out of the way, and again, we're going to do a quick overview, a relatively quick overview of why this issue of fish and recreational flows and in-stream flows is such an important, if not hot topic in the state right now, where that came from as a result of the Comprehensive Water Plan, as well as what this sort of pilot study that we're looking at for the Illinois River watershed is all about, what that process will look like as it unfolds. But the key, again, is to devote most of the time tonight to input from you all. So as we talk about what are the values of water in the Illinois River watershed, what are those? And are there concerns as we talk about making sure that we have sufficient water to take care of fish, recreational needs, those sorts of things? Are there concerns that we need to make sure get addressed in that process as well? I'm the first to know, and it's unfortunate to have to use the word study in that title slide and in this description, because I know a lot of folks in this part of the state, particularly the Illinois River watershed, feel like it's been studied to death. Not another study in the Illinois River watershed. We've been involved in study after study after study of various things in the Illinois River watershed. But this is really kind of the first time to take a look at sort of non-water quality related issues. This is kind of a little more, it certainly has water quality implications, no doubt, but we're really talking about the quantity of water in this watershed and how that relates to our state's appropriation system, how we appropriate water, issue permits for people to withdraw water from the lakes and streams in this part of the state, and more emphasis on that aspect. So I'm going to do some quick introductions. I know we're going to have speakers here today. Derek Smithy from the Water Resources Board, our Water Quality Chief. Forrest Olson with CH2M, who will also be speaking, as well as John Drury right after me, who's trying to plug everything in back there. And so Anna Childers with CH2M over there as well, another contractor working with us on this project. But let me also recognize we have an in-stream flow advisory group that has been in place that really was launched in the midst of the Comprehensive Water Plan update process starting about 2009, 2010. And I see several members of that in-stream flow advisory group, which is kind of a statewide advisory group that advises the Water Resources Board on this issue. And I see several members of that group in the crowd. If you would stand up. I won't take a ton of time to introduce you all, but if you would stand up. Thank you for being here. These are members of our in-stream flow advisory group for the state. Thank you. Including our Secretary of Agriculture, who may be not wanting to be introduced right now, by the way. I see him ducking down in his seat. Jim Reese, thank you for being here. Secretary Reese, Secretary of Ag for the state of Oklahoma. I can easily introduce everybody in the crowd, but let me make sure. Oh, we do have some additional staff from the Water Resources Board. So we have with us today Cole Perryman. Where'd you go, Cole, back there? His job was to keep me awake coming up and going back tonight. Monty Porter with our water quality staff does a lot of sampling. and Jason Childress right there with our water quality standards staff. So thank you for being here. Again, these guys are going to go into a lot more detail about why we're here. But again, I want to emphasize tonight we appreciate you being here. We look forward to the input and advice and counsel and recommendations that you have for us. We hope that you aren't frustrated by another study, and at the end of this introduction tonight, see the difference in what we're proposing to do here versus what we've been doing for decades with regard to phosphorus in the Illinois River watershed and that sort of thing. This is quite a bit different subject, but extremely important for the state of Oklahoma. And in our view, and the view of our advisory council, there's no better place to look at sort of the value of water on fishing and recreation and tourism than really kind of the poster child for water-based recreation in the state of Oklahoma, the Illinois River watershed. So that's really why we're here at the end of the day. So Derek, did I forget anything really important? Probably covered half your presentation, right? Bathroom is always important to Derek. He has to go. That's why I don't ride with Derek, because every 15 minutes he has to go. Where are the restrooms? Back down, around the corner? Right and right. Okay, he's already scoped those out. Bathroom, what else? That's it? We'll let you take it from here. John Brewery's going to be next. Again, thank you, and look forward to your input. John Brewery, take it away.
Okay, I'm also going to step away from the mic. It's not working, though. Can you hear me in the back of the room?
Yes.
Is that all right? Okay. Let me know if that changes, and I'll speak up or go back to the mic. We've got an agenda that I think most of you picked up on the way in. There is a sign-in sheet as well, and I'd ask you to sign in there if you haven't already. JD provided the welcome and introductions. I'm going to give a quick background about the Instream Flow Advisory Group and the role they've played, as well as some of the history that got us to this point tonight, where we're talking about a pilot study. Derek is going to talk about some specifics in this area of previous studies and how that illustrates what we're doing for this current pilot study. And then Forrest Olson will talk about the specifics of the plan for this pilot study that we're now embarking on. We'll then, even though that looks like a long list compared to the public comment, really, as JD said, that's the main point of being here, is to get your input and your thoughts. And so we will be recording that on a flip chart and then using that to really guide what we do from here forward. Now, the last thing we'll talk about is next steps and how this process unfolds. So housekeeping items, if you have a cell phone on, please put it on vibrate or some other silent mode, or we'll find you. We talked about the restrooms, you know where those are. Exits, so in the event that there is some kind of emergency, there are exit signs pretty well lit, but you can get out either in here. If you have questions, I'm going to ask you to hold those until the end of the individual presentations, particularly if it's like a clarification on that presentation, so that we get a chance to get through those presentations. We'll have plenty of time for comment later, but if you have a question clarifying something about the presentation that you just saw, we'll ask you to give us those questions right at the end of that presentation. Lastly, time-wise, we're scheduled here till 9 o'clock, and we'll try and honor that by moving through this agenda fairly rapidly up front so we can get to the public comment. Now, there's several different ways you can keep in touch. One really good resource is the Water Board's website. That's their main website address, OWRB.opa.gov. But if you do /ISF, that takes you straight to the Instream Flow webpage. And that's where we're keeping all kinds of good resources that may be useful to you. You can also keep in touch by email. If you'd like to be notified about future stakeholder meetings here, or other things that are going on with the study, if you provide your email address on the sign-in sheet and indicate that you are interested in getting those emails, that'll really help us out. Conversely, email, of course, goes two ways, and so if you're interested in providing some input or some comments or so forth electronically by email, you can contact Derek. Derek's email address is listed there. It's also on the agendas. Also, if you've got written feedback, that's another avenue. Do we have no cards? Yeah, so there are no cards on the table. You can leave those with us if you're not comfortable speaking in front of the group, or don't have time to get here or need to leave, but want to provide some input before the end of the meeting. Certainly that's another avenue available to you. And you can also use the telephone. There's Derek's number, that's the main number for the water board. And you can use that as another avenue for providing input. So JD mentioned about the focus of tonight's discussion. We're here to talk about in-stream flows, and I've highlighted a few of the words there, but the in-stream flows, we're talking about flows necessary to provide a healthy ecosystem and water-related recreation, as well as tourism. And we'll talk a lot about what that means, and we want your input about how water is used and how the river is important to the community. But that's sort of the basics about what we're talking about. We've got the study area there. That shows the whole watershed, but actually we're going to be zoomed in and looking at the segments highlighted in green here. That's really the study area, and again, Forrest will cover that in additional detail. But that's the focus for tonight's discussion. It's really about in-stream flows in this particular area, upstream of Lake Tenkiller. So we're not talking about lake-related recreation on Lake Tenkiller or anything further downstream, but really in the areas that you see highlighted there with the green stream segments. So with that, I'm going to provide a quick background about the Comprehensive Water Plan. Many of you I know are familiar with the 2012 update of the Oklahoma Comprehensive Water Plan that the Water Resources Board published. That was in 2012. It really was the most comprehensive water plan ever put together by the state. There's an executive report, and we've got copies of it here. If you're interested in that and don't have it, it's a really nice resource. The executive report summarizes all the technical studies and the results of those technical studies that were done over a 4 or 5 year process leading up to the publishing of that. It also has water policy recommendations. And this was formulated through significant public input statewide that really helped shape then how we implement the water plan that was published in 2012. Another really good resource is we took the state, we broke it down into 13 different planning regions and 82 different basins underneath those 13 regions. And that's where if you want a lot more detail about the technical analyses that were done, or analyses of supply and demand and projected shortages in supply, all of that is wrapped up in these watershed planning region reports. So the stakeholder process, the public process, really literally involved hundreds of meetings leading up to that 2010 Comprehensive Water Plan. We did that in all 13 regions, and the public input and priorities that were garnered from that process really helped shape the primary recommendations from the water plan. Those recommendations, there were a number of them, but there were 8 priority recommendations identified in the water plan, and they're listed here. What I want to call your attention to is what we're here to talk about tonight. In-stream flows was one of the 8 priority recommendations in the Comprehensive Water Plan on a statewide basis. Obviously important at the local level, but it was recognized as a priority issue for the state as well. And so what the Comprehensive Water Plan charged the state with essentially is taking a harder look then at ascertaining the suitability and structure of an in-stream flow program for Oklahoma. Right now there is no formal in-stream flow program. We do have the Scenic Rivers program, but the water plan said we ought to continue this process and further understand whether there ought to be a formal in-stream flow program for Oklahoma, and if so, what that structure might look like. So that in-stream flow advisory group that was convened as part of that development of the 2012 plan came up with the following 6 recommendations or path forward. One was to address legal and policy recommendation or questions. Do we have the authority to do an in-stream flow program in Oklahoma? Another was to study other mechanisms for protecting in-stream flows. Are there already mechanisms in how we manage water that provide protection for in-stream flows? Third was to develop a draft methodology for in-stream flow studies in Oklahoma. Fourth was to conduct a study on the economic impacts of in-stream flows in Oklahoma. That can be both benefits and potential downsides. We'll talk about that. And then the fifth was to perform an in-stream flow pilot study in a scenic river. And that's the stage that we're now at. Now, of course, the sixth one was pretty easy, preserve the in-stream flow work group. That work group was preserved and, in fact, continued to meet over the past couple of years to go through and essentially start down this path. JD introduced the members of the in-stream flow advisory group that have been meeting to help guide this on a statewide level. They're all listed here, but what you see here is there's a real diversity of representation here. Everything from folks like Marley with the Farm Bureau, to Mike with Continental Resources, representing the energy sector. The Municipal League was involved. Folks from the Conservation Commission works this year. Just a widespread, different set of viewpoints that all help contribute to this advisory group's activities. So as I said, that we did preserve and continue the Instream Flow work group, and their work really focused initially on these first two elements. And we did some statewide analyses and made some progress on trying to flesh those out a little bit further and really dig into the questions there. But we realized that there really are a lot of outstanding questions that we couldn't answer on a broad statewide basis. And so with that led the group to conclude that really this was an important step, this step number 5, to perform an in-stream flow study in a scenic river basin in Oklahoma, was really an important step in the process to help us better understand both the benefits and the challenges with an in-stream flow system that could be potentially implemented for Oklahoma. And so with that, the group concluded that we ought to do an in-stream flow pilot study and selected the Upper Illinois River watershed as the best place to do that as our initial in-stream flow pilot study. So that's the stage we're at now. That's really the background that got us to this point. With that, Derek is going to talk about some of the past work that's been done, specifically to analyze in-stream flows.
I was particularly pleased when John went through the initial slides to see that my email address was in orange. Didn't you think that was pretty, bud?
No post.
Everybody looks pretty in orange. That's kind of my philosophy. I am here to talk for a few minutes about how Oklahoma has stuck fingers and ventured into the in-stream flow program over the last couple of decades. And you're going to see now for the second time the Oklahoma Comprehensive Water Plan's definition of an in-stream flow. Essentially, it's like the John Cougar Mellencamp song about balance. I know it as I swing by. Sometimes we have trouble finding that happy middle ground, and that's what an in-stream flow program really is about, is finding that balanced, cooperative program where we utilize Oklahoma's water resources for both consumptive and non-consumptive uses. That has not generally been how Oklahoma has operated. And as you can see, our current appropriation system, our water rights allocation system, really doesn't consider other non-consumptive uses of water. Things like tourism, and recreation, and bird watching, and boating, and swimming, endangered species. It really doesn't consider those very well. So as the water plan process evolved, we heard pretty strongly that we needed to start looking at how we can do that a little bit better. One of the ways, though, we've historically done that accidentally is with a domestic use set-aside. There are 3 areas that Oklahoma, or 3 times, 3 exit ramps, if you will, where Oklahoma's dealt with in-stream flows, and this thing called the domestic use set-aside is one of them. When Oklahoma issues a surface water permit, as a component of that permit, the process assures that we leave water in the stream or river such that those people living downstream also have access to water for their house and their crops. So we set aside, for domestic purposes, 6 acre-feet of water for every 160 acres of land in the watershed above that point of allocation. So even though we aren't really setting water aside for non-consumptive uses of water, by default we have been historically setting water aside to flow downstream for domestic purposes, and other non-consumptive uses benefit from that domestic use set-aside. So we have a sort of a mechanism to assure that some flows are set aside for downstream use. We actually have also done 2 in-stream flow studies in the state of Oklahoma historically, on the Barren Fork and on the Arbuckle-Simpson groundwater study in south central Oklahoma. I'll talk about the Barren Fork first. It's hard for me to believe this has been 15 years ago, But we had a water rights allocation on the Barren Fork, and we did an in-stream flow study cooperatively with Oklahoma State University to determine how much water could be taken out of the Barren Fork at Adair County Rural Water District number 5, I'll just say it, at Adair number 5, such that they still have their water rights and can serve their rural water district members, but also assure that the downstream uses below that point are maintained and protected. That was important to strike that balance in this particular case. Dr. Lair went out and did that study. He had a couple of graduate students assist him. There were some people involved in the public participation piece. Ultimately, Dr. Fisher chose the canary in the coal mine of a smallmouth bass, you can see there on the bottom right, as kind of an indicator species for all the rest of the non-consumptive uses of that water. And essentially then, if we protect for habitat, reproduction, and ecological integrity of smallmouth bass, he and the work group believe that swimming, recreation, ecological integrity, and other non-consumptive uses would be maintained. So Dr. Fisher set about determining if you artificially withdrew water at a prescribed rate at different seasons, what would be the impact to smallmouth bass habitat. And essentially, at the end of the day, his study showed that somewhere between 30 and 75 CFS needed to be maintained in the Barren Fork to maintain that viable smallmouth bass fishery, and hence all non-consumptive uses of that water. Ultimately then, we selected 50 CFS at the Eldon gauge as a threshold event, and limited in our rules, modified the future permits and water withdrawals out of the Barren Fork such that that 50 CFS was maintained and protected. So that was our first foray about 15 years ago. Secondly, on the Arbuckle-Simpson aquifer, the state of Oklahoma was charged with maintaining the natural flow of water from springs or streams emanating from the Arbuckle-Simpson aquifer and not degrading or interfering with springs or streams. This was involved a groundwater permit because people wanted to take water out of the Arbuckle-Simpson, but several places were highly dependent upon that groundwater and the springs that emanated, like Old Platte National Park or Chickasaw National Recreation Area. It's a spring-driven environment. Well, there was a real concern about drying up those springs through the withdrawal of groundwater. So, we were charged with determining, well, how much spring flow really is necessary to meet those two parameters. We formed a work group. We discussed a lot of alternatives. Ultimately, though, we did a very similar in-stream flow incremental methodology study on the springs emanating from that aquifer, and chose the canary in the coal mine in this case to be protective of all in-stream uses. A little darter called the least darter. You can see it on the bottom there, Ethiostoma microperca, and it is a spring obligate. It's an organism that requires spring flow to survive optimally. So if you protect microperca, you protect this darter, you are protecting spring and stream flow. So we did a bunch of cross-sects. We hired Oklahoma State to help us with that study. We did a bunch of, we actually put on, the guys put on snorkel gear, did the swim up and down the stream, where do you find fish, what's the habitat associated with it, and mapped the impact to habitat on multiple fish species if you artificially lowered the flow of different locations. And there you can see at different reductions in flow, you had different impacts to different organisms. And ultimately, the state of Oklahoma, through the work group, chose 25% of reduction in base flow as an acceptable reduction in spring flow, and that ultimately fed in to the Arbuckle-Simpson study and drove how much groundwater could be withdrawn, yet still maintain ecological integrity. So those are two studies the state of Oklahoma has already completed. What Forrest is getting ready to talk about will be a similar kind of animal, and then layered over all of that is this concept of a domestic use set-aside where we kind of accidentally do protect downstream uses. So, in response now to our charge of doing a pilot study in our 6 scenic rivers, the state of Oklahoma has hired Forrest Olson to lead the charge of doing this study. He would be happy to do it all by himself, but he's got a lot of people to help him do this work, and we're here today to let Forrest now talk about how the Instream flow study is going to look.
Any quick questions for Derek while we switch over presentations?
Perfect. Yeah, oh, I didn't get down fast enough. Yes, sir.
What's the interface with Arkansas?
The interface?
It doesn't change just because it crosses the state line.
Yeah, the water doesn't magically say okay on it when it enters the state. Arkansas will not be bound by the results of our study, but the hydrology, the ecology, the aquatic community, Arkansas will be a part of that work, and although we're only focusing on the scenic rivers in Oklahoma, Arkansas is not really going to be a part of this work directly. Yes, sir.
Is there any working with the Joint Commission,
Okay, the question is there any interaction with the Joint Study Committee that I also serve on? No. Well, not really. The Joint Study Committee is a gubernatorially assigned task force. 3 members from the state of Oklahoma assigned by the governor, 3 people from Arkansas assigned by the Arkansas governor. The 6 of us are getting together and doing a $600,000 study on the scenic rivers to confirm, refute, or find a different number for the .037 phosphorus criteria. And that study is underway. We're looking at primary productivity, algae production, grazer densities with stone rollers, so it's a very exhaustive study. The only area that this study will interact with that is probably some of forest sites will be the same sites that Dr. Ryan King is using on his joint study. So there's no...
isn't there a real impact between inflow and stream inflow as far as what wastewater is in that work?
Some, but forest study is looking at water quantity. That's primarily a water quality issue. Now there is some, Sager Creek is primarily flows from Siloam Springs. Fayetteville discharges into the Illinois watershed, so there are some wastewater impacts, and absolutely, and they will be captured in forest study. So there is a little bit of a relationship, but this is really this is getting at the quantity piece, not the total phosphorus, primary productivity, water quality.
But there could be some
There,
overlays where it would be on this, maybe we'd be at 590.
oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? I'm not sure they would agree, but I think that'd be wonderful. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there a reason the lower Illinois River is not included in the study?
Is there a reason the lower Illinois is not included in the study? The only good reason it's not included is it's not a scenic river. And we chose to target this study on scenic rivers because that was widely recognized by the advisory group as the most fertile ground to do this kind of work, because people recognized that the authority was pretty clear on scenic rivers. We had a lot of studies in the past. We know more about the upper Illinois River than we do the lower Illinois. Now, all of us hope, and Forrest will say this in a second, the results of this pilot study will have application throughout the whole state of Oklahoma. It may not be to establish an in-stream flow, but the processes and the methodologies will have application widespread. Otherwise, why do a pilot study?
Because we have had fish kills there.
Absolutely. There have been fish kills below 10 killer, especially in the trout area.
That's impacted tourism and revenue for
Absolutely.
the neighborhood.
Now, we did have, I'm probably trampling on your toes, Forrest. We did have a little bit of discussion today about how this study might want to look at potential downstream impacts from navigation, hydropower, the trout fishery below 10 killer and all fisheries below 10 killer. So there's whole bunch of downstream impacts, water cooperative compacts between Oklahoma and Arkansas. So there's a lot of relation there. So this study's probably going to touch on that a little bit, but it's, the vast majority of it will be focused on the upper Illinois River area. Other questions in the back?
So if you, I know it said that you had addressed the legal and the policy issues involved. So at the end of the study, when you reach that number that this is the amount that we need to protect the species, how are you going to enforce that? Are you going to add it to the rules like you did in Barrenford? Or what's the thought on how you're going to use this information in making permitting decisions? Okay, the question is, once this study's done and we have a number or a range of numbers, then what happens to weave it into water quantity management? And that's step 2 in the process. It's a public process. It'll be captured in the Water Board's rules for water rights permitting potentially. Some states have it as a rule that you must. Some states have it as an option maybe. So that's a second step in this process. Once the science is laid and we know what the parameters are for protection, then we know what the speed limit is. Then we set about figuring out how we're going to enforce that speed limit. So that's step 2 of the process. And that will be public too. Absolutely. We're all about the transparency piece. Any other quick questions?
I'm going to suggest that we move on. So I think some of these are probably going to be answered by Forrest's presentation, and we'll have a chance for lots more questions and input.
Okay, thank you. My name is Forrest Olson. I'm a fisheries biologist, work for C.H. John Young, and been in this in-stream flow business for 30 plus years. I've not studied a stream in Oklahoma yet, so I'm looking forward to that. Derek asked me a couple weeks ago what was the definition of an in-stream flow, and then after I came up with the definition, he told me what the working definition is, so I compared them here. The generic definition of an in-stream flow, just the amount of water needed for an in-stream flow resource, and what are the resources. As a biologist, we think of fish, wildlife, water quality. The working definition, as you see there, it flows necessary to support recreation like fishing. So the slight difference is the Oklahoma definition talks about fishing, the generic one talks about fish. So what's good for fish is good for fishing. It all kind of relates. So the Oklahoma one's a little bit more related to the human use aspects of it. Both definitions have the ecosystem health component to it. It's not just a matter of water for the fish, it's the water necessary for the stream to maintain its size, repairing vegetation, move gravel and sediment downstream. There's a lot of aspects to a river ecosystem that's important that we're going to be captured in this study. He also asked me what is an in-stream flow method or methodology. I'll explain to you what we're going to be doing. But in general, a method is just a way of determining how much water is sufficient to meet your needs for in-stream flows. And you can use sufficient like I did, you can use adequate, acceptable, desirable, a lot of value-laden terms in that definition. It's not a black and white, this or that. A method, there are some very simple methods used for determining what would be maybe an acceptable in-stream flow. Some real quick and dirty formulas. Some states, for example, use for a guideline 30% of mean annual flow. They set as a guideline for minimum flows in the summer. That's a method. It doesn't give you much except just a number. It doesn't give you much information. So we're going to take what's called a methodology. A methodology infers more of a process and decision support system. That includes input from stakeholders. The two primary goals of this study, the first one is to develop seasonal in-stream flow recommendations for the in-stream, for the Illinois River, including Barrenford and Flint. No other tributaries. And notice we use the word recommendation. It gets back to the question earlier, how are these recommendations going to be implemented? Yep, they are. That's step 2. The scientists were just going to come up with what we believe are the a good range of flows to protect in-stream flow resources. The second objective here, or goal, has to do with the pilot aspect of it. This is a bit wordy, but the last line there says that study hopefully will help define a conceptual framework and process that can be used statewide. And also on the note here, this is, I think, very important in this study. Different from most every other in-stream flow study I've done. This one, we do not have a proposed water project. Nobody's proposing a dam, nobody's proposing to divert water or do anything. So there should be no controversy, because there's no controversy on the project. We're kind of taking the reverse approach of trying to identify some acceptable in-stream flows before somebody comes along and proposes a big project. Chances are they won't on this river because it's scenic, but generically that's kind of an approach here, is to come up with speed limits, as Jared called them, so that those wanting to protect the stream have some numbers to work with, and those who maybe want to take water out of the stream will have some guidance as to how much might be available. Here are some statements having to do with the pilot aspect of the study. Just want to get a better understanding of the implications of a possible statewide program. Certainly additional questions and concerns. One reason we're here tonight, we want to hear that from you folks. Identify some technical components that could be applied to other studies. And some of the nuts and bolts here, how much is it going to cost? These studies are pretty spendy, and there's a lot of watersheds in the state, so we want to get a better handle on how much it would cost to do additional studies in different rivers down the line. Why are we studying the scenic river? I think Jared addressed this already. This river is not a regulated river. There's no big storage, release reservoirs and dams on the river. I know there's a little additional water brought in from Arkansas, and of course there's some water taken out. Not a whole lot. There's no big irrigation diversions, no cities, municipal things. That makes my life as a scientist a lot easier because it's in pretty natural shape, and of course that's why the stream is valued as it is. It's a state scenic river, and there's language in there that leads to the protection of flows to protect the resources that make it a scenic river. For that reason, there's already some precedent for establishing or regulating flows for that purpose. And as all of you know, a lot of stream-based or flow-based recreation. Spent the last 2 days with that fight, driving around the watershed and seeing all the places where people put in, and the rafting and the canoeing and the boating and all the other activities that occur on the river. Wouldn't be there if there wasn't a river with water. And the watershed, as J.D. and Eric mentioned, there's quite a bit of information already on this river. It's been studied a lot, which makes our job easier in conducting this study. And lastly, it was recommended by the advisory group to study this river, or a scenic river. You've seen this map, study area, again, it's just in Oklahoma, that we will be trying to summarize some information about water quality from Arkansas to include in our report. We're not going to be analyzing a lot, but we will try to characterize the contribution, if you will, from Arkansas. Now, the general study approach we're going to be using, as I think Derek mentioned, is called the IFIM, Industry Flow Incremental Methodology. The general approach that was used in Barren Fork. And the official manual for the methodology. I might mention the methodology was developed in the late 70s by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it has by far been the most popular in-stream flow study methodology worldwide since then. It's robust enough that it can handle most anything. It notes 5 different phases that we will be following. The first one in the methodology calls problem identification. I've changed it to information evaluation because we don't have that proposed project. We don't have that problem. Adverse impacts expected from a big dam, for example. So ours is more of an opportunity rather than a problem. So there's a little tailoring of the methodology to account for that aspect. Second phase is just doing a study plan, which is technical, which we're in the process of doing now. Then you implement the study, you go out in the field, collect data, do background information reviews, eventually analyze the data. Step four is to analyze alternatives. Now, in the case of a proposed water development project, there's always some alternative flow, alternative project design or operation. We don't have that. Again, we don't have a proposed water project. So mostly we'll just be analyzing and interpreting the information that we have and then coming up with flow recommendations at the end. Problem resolution is the official methodology, which usually infers everybody working together to come up with a solution to in-stream flows and project design and alternatives. Again, we're just dealing with flows and no project. This is a general flow chart of our activities. Most of those 5 steps I just talked about are in here. We define our study goals and objectives. We have the basic ones now. We may refine those as we get more information, more input from public perhaps. The second line there is the background information review. Before we do these studies, and while we're doing these studies, we'd like to summarize and characterize everything we know about the river that relates to in-stream flow resources. To the left side, we've got the institutional stuff, so there'll be a summary of the kind of legal regulatory setting. And a lot of that's already available in the reports on the state's website. Eric talk about some of those. And the other is the stakeholder input, that's the institutional part of this thing. We think we know everything, that we have public meetings, and a lot of issues come up that we haven't thought about, and it's always important to get that. On the right side is more of the background information we're going to summarize about the stream, about the fish and wildlife, about the flow in the river now. There's good gauge data all up and down the river. Recreational use, and Fight's going to help us characterize that. Water quality. Not everything, it's just not a water quality study, but there are certain water quality parameters that are related to flow, nutrients, flow of water, dilutes nutrients, assimilates waste, moves it out of the system. One thing I noticed the other day was there's a lot of attached algae on the rocks, and when you have a higher flow, it flushes it out, so there's a certain flushing component to the flows. That's what people wouldn't think about from just a base flow standpoint, having some flows to keep the stream healthy. Water use, water rights. The board's going to summarize the water rights that are currently on the books for the river. We'll try to put some seasonality to that so we know what's going on. We'll try to get some information from Arkansas as well. To help on the technical side, we put together a technical study work group. I got the word work in here because I want them to do some actual work instead of just advising. And here's the representatives. There's 9 organizations. The board, of course. Corps of Engineers is funding this study. State Joe Hill is a contractor to the Corps and working with the board. Department of Wildlife, Conservation Commission, Scenic Rivers Commission, U.S. Geological Survey, folks at Oklahoma State University, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Nature Conservancy. All technical folks. This is not a policy group. This is just technical stuff. As far as the institutional side, kind of our steps were to first identify stakeholders and interested parties. So we all got together, got on the phone, got emails going, came up with a list of folks to invite to this meeting, and then public announcements to get the word out. So that's done. Second step is tonight, we have our first stakeholder meeting. Trying to get information or input from you folks and then answer questions in return. after this meeting, we're going to be documenting in some fashion, summarizing this meeting, listing out the concerns, and address those that will legitimately need addressing. These are some of the previously identified institutional issues, the legal consideration. Derek talked about some of these, potential effects on current and future water rights, the process of implementing the flows. Again, this study is just going to come up with recommendations for flows, and they're in the process of if and how and when they would get implemented on this river or any river is this step 2. And how they get implemented would determine whether or not there's a need for statutory changes. Most states deal with their in-stream flows within their regulatory framework without needing to pass new laws and regulations. And then the final is the need for a formal in-stream flow program that can be used statewide. I mean, this is a pilot study to help answer some of those questions. One of the steps we're going to be doing in the next few months is just pulling together existing information on the river. We want to get our management goals defined. It's kind of wordy here, I just kind of underlined some keywords. But this gets back to the fish and the flow and the water quality and recreation uses and the water rights. Study planning, the third phase of this thing. This is just kind of nuts and bolts. Who, what, when, where, and how the study is going to be done, not why. Everything else. So pretty much define where, when, information we're looking for, figure out how we're going to get that information, collect it, analyze it, and then again nuts and bolts, determining labor estimates, equipment needs, access to the sites, and set deadlines and reports. Implementing it, basically collect data. We'll be collecting field data this spring through summer on the river. We'll be doing some hydraulic modeling, which will then be integrated with fish habitat needs to produce fish habitat versus flow relationships, similar to what was done on the Bering Fork. So we have a predictive model, and then we interpret and synthesize these results. This is an example of the fish habitat flow relationship I was talking to. This is actually the Bering Fork study that was done in 2000. And you can see on the y-axis here on top is the stream flow. It's a metric on the bottom, so I would be interested. And as you see, there's a point, as the flow goes up, you get more habitat, and there's a range of flows in there where you have a lot of good habitat for fish, and then at very high flows it drops off. This is for smallmouth bass. We'll be looking at this species because it's most common sport fish in the river, but we'll also be looking at groupings of other fish, river-dwelling fish, pool-dwelling fish. For example, I think he had told me there's 72 species of fish in the Illinois River. So we're not going to model every one of them, because then you just get a graph that looks like spaghetti. But we can put them into groups and called functional groups. So this is our next steps that we're going to be doing. We're going to summarize the stakeholder comments in some fashion here. That's going to happen right after this meeting in the next few weeks. Going to do any refinement of goals and objectives. Input from folks here would help on that. There are written objectives and goals and basin plans and whatnot. They're all very similar but not exactly the same. So we'll come up with something a little more official. Then we'll develop a study plan that we'll work with on the technical study group. We're going to complete this effort, not complete probably, but draft out our summary of existing information available for the river. A lot of it's in the basin plan already and other reports, so we're going to try to assemble it all together. And then we'll start our data collection late this spring, and it'll probably go through the summer. The methodology requires that you get measurements of the river flow and river stage at different flows to help develop a model. And so we're kind of beholden to Mother Nature and the flows too. I'm hoping it won't be a drought year. So and then kind of skip in there because we'll be doing our data analysis and interpretation. And we're hoping to get the study completed by the end of the year. Field work in the summer, modeling, report writing in the fall, and have some kind of report out by the end of the year. But don't hold me to that exact date. So, are there any questions on this technical part? And then I think we'll probably go on to more general questions. Perfect.
The studies being done, will there be a freeze on any additional permit request from the Water Resources Board?
Good question. I did not hear the question. Repeat the question, John.
Yeah, the question was, while the study's being done, will there be a freeze on any additional permitting for water rights in the
No.
basin?
No.
Answer is no.
If so, why not? If the study is public, it might be part of it.
There's no reason to, there's no authority to. We don't have any big pending applications for water withdrawals right now in the Illinois River anyway, so I don't think it makes any sense to. But we have no reason to until we kind of know what the results of this is going to be. There's, I might mention right after, I'm sure we'll hear it come up again, I can already sense a desire to jump to second base, which is, okay, how are you going to implement this stuff after the study's done? We heard that several times. And, my initial response is, we don't know how we're going to implement it because we don't know what it is yet. There are 16 of about the 18 western states have some sort of an in-stream flow process procedure, and all of them do it differently. Every one of them is different. So we have no idea at this stage what it is we're talking about. I mean, this really is a big step. So this is our effort to sort of bridge the philosophical debate about whether or not we need to make changes to water law and water appropriation in Oklahoma to protect non-consumptive uses of water, and bridging that philosophical debate to the actual world. So here's our real world, real live watershed in the state of Oklahoma that has real live people living in it and real live livelihoods, many of which depend on the river and the rivers in the watershed and that sort of thing. So it gives us an opportunity to talk to the people. That's why we're here tonight, why we'll continue to come back to get your input as to what it is that you value off of the river in this watershed. How can we measure those values scientifically and compare them to how we manage water as a state in this watershed? And are there any tweaks, changes, modifications necessary to be able to align the two? We don't know at this stage. So it doesn't make sense to cut off permitting, appropriation of water, because we don't even know if that's going to be necessary at the end of the day. So,
How many stakeholder meetings are you in this state?
Well, the first one, we always have one toward the end when we've got our results, and then one, maybe two in between. All I can say is, I think I like 3 or 4, if there's a need for more, certainly, fine, do it, yes.
You've kind of reviewed how you're going to establish the biological demands, or if you want to call them that, by using the indicator of smallmouth bass. How are you going to quantify the recreational needs beyond simply the fish? Because this upper river in the summer obviously has a tremendous recreational impact on it.
Oh, on the fishing. You're talking
On the river,
Non-fish-based recreational needs.
right.
Right.
How do you quantify that?
Rats.
How do you quantify that impact?
Trying to figure it, wait, how do you quantify the needs for fishing or
Boating, rafting.
Boating, rafting, and other non-fishing
Oh, I see.
uses.
Yeah. At this going to characterize and summarize the information on floating. Because this is a non-regulated river, not a whole lot you can do. You're going to get the flow that you got. Now, if we were studying a river where they have controlled flow coming out of a dam, there are ways where you can evaluate different flows for certain types of, say, whitewater, or kayaking, or canoeing, whatever there is. That's not the case here, so we're not going to be doing a study of how much water the recreation boating needs. It's certainly identified by the big use of the river.
No, that's what we need to know. Are we overloading the upper part of the river with floaters? Should we limit the number of floaters we put on there at any certain time, because there's not enough water in for them to float safely?
I think, I would suggest we're getting in some good input from stakeholders about things they want to see quantified in this deal, no matter what, the technical contractors and others, you know, this is good info for us. So.
Yeah, we're aware that the boating seems to be the #1 activity out there on the river.
It's our money, it's our bread.
You bet, yeah. And there's no proposal to change the flows from what Mother Nature is giving us right now. But maybe what you're talking about is more how to manage differently that.
No, but it gets down to a minimum flow level, you know, and it's not safe.
If you say you can go ahead and permit out Greenleaf Nursery 15 million gallons per hour or whatever per day, and that brings it down low where we can't float our boats on the upper end, that does have an impact. I mean, it's a huge impact, and probably more so than, I love my smallmouth bass, no offense, Larry, but economically, from an impact level, your watercraft have a bigger impact.
Yeah, sometimes, in a lot of cases, what's kind of good for the fish and the ecosystem in general is good for recreational use, especially in a natural river like this where, you know, you get what you got. There are other rivers that are really controlled flow, and the studies done specifically to determine the amount of water needed for certain kind of boating activity. But in the future, you know, this thing is looking at is establishing minimum flows to protect the resources, more than just the fish, but the rafting. And, you know,
Yeah, I thought that was the whole objective, was to get not just fishing, but all uses of the river.
Recreation.
yeah.
That was part of the definition.
So it's, yeah,
And it should be.
yeah, it should be.
Now, I do want to say, though, it is, I mean, test my understanding, you were getting at boater carrying capacity.
Yes.
And this study is not designed to get at canoe, raft, kayak capacity, you know, 3,000 a day or 200 a day or whatever. It's not designed to get at that.
As we get more density and more private wells that aren't even monitored.
Now, it could get at that, but not how many, what's the maximum amount of canoers that can go down a river and still maintain some nature experience? It won't get at that, if that makes any sense.
Where we can be able to identify rural water districts that
Oh, yeah,
draw
absolutely.
water out and have 40, 50, 60% leakage, but rather than repair the pipes, they just continue to draw water out.
It will get at how much rural water districts can take out, or any irrigated agriculture or municipalities, and still maintain this balanced consumptive, non-consumptive use of the water.
In your technical methodology, I didn't see the word used, which I always bring up, there's an absence of hydrogeology. This whole area is a karst topography. And you must understand or measure and incorporate in your methodology the interconnectedness between groundwater and your stream water. It is very unusual and very high in this area. No other basin has the same characteristics as we have here. And you have to have the discipline of hydrogeologists to help you understand the mechanics of what's happening with your stream flow. I'm not familiar with all your individuals on this in-stream flow technical group, but do we have hydrogeologists involved in this? Or will you?
We don't right now. Certainly interaction with groundwater and surface water and many streams is important, and it sounds like it is in this river. And that kind of gets into the future, you know, wells and groundwater removal and that affecting stream flow. I'm not sure if there, do you know if has there been studies on this river relating to the groundwater?
Yes, that's a good comment.
The USGS did an excellent report upstream, to the north over in Arkansas. Actually, Tahlequah was one of the co-authors on it. I think you have a USGS representative on your board. They have done some studies which should be reviewed by the engineers. I get into this all the time with the engineers. There is water underneath the ground, gentlemen, we have to account for. So yes, there are, and I would advise you to study them and incorporate them that cover this area. Good, thank you, John.
Yeah, that's a good comment, not just from this river, but a lot of rivers, the interaction and certainly use from wells affecting streams is a big issue. And we want this to be a pilot study, so we want to make sure that's on the list.
Yeah, don't be careful, because remember what happened to the Corps of Engineers who did not have any hydrogeologists. Remember optimal reservoir storage. Okay, they did their study, and it was a 10-year interval before they built their dam. During that time, the irrigators drilled a whole bunch of wells and diminished the flow in the stream. If you're having irrigation increasing up and down this river basin, by the time you get through your study and they've increased, your flow is going to go down, and your statistics and methodology won't work. You've got to understand what's happening with the groundwater being taken out of your water basin.
Okay.
There's a reason we didn't pick the Beaver River to do it. Many reasons.
I'm going to continue the question in just a second, but I wanted to, for those that maybe can't stay all the way till 9 o'clock or until we're done with questions and comments, I wanted to reiterate the ways that we've got available to us, and leave that up there to provide comment outside of the verbal discussion that we're having here. Also, up top, you'll see we listed a few questions that we really are looking for your input on. Of course, whatever comes to mind, but these are particular areas that will be helpful for us. And then I wanted to let you know that we're going to take the input that we're getting here and the comments and questions, and we're going to incorporate that into our thinking and our planning. And when we come back to the next stakeholder meeting in a few months, we'll tell you sort of how this is all being used then to shape what we're doing. Okay? So back to you.
Okay, I guess this gentleman covered some of my questions, but some of the other things that came to mind is we haven't really talked a lot about the impact on the ecosystem, the minimum stream flows for that. Is that part of this study?
Yes, and it's not just minimum flows. We use the term in-stream flow rather than minimum flow. Minimum flow generally means the base flow period, summer period.
Okay, so you'll be covering things such as the impacts to wetlands and oxbow streams and lakes and all of those sorts of things as well?
It's not so much impacts, because again, we don't have a project here, but we'll certainly be looking at the flows necessary to support the stream process. You got to have a certain amount of high flows at a certain frequency that shapes the river channel, that moves the sediment.
So you were talking about the flushing earlier, and okay.
Yeah, that'll all be reviewed from a hydrologic standpoint.
Okay.
And a lot of good information there. Historically, history flow has just dealt with that base flow period, and then the big storage project come along, knock off the high flows, the stream channel downstream shrinks, the oxbows get separated, things dry up, vegetation encroaches, a lot of adverse impacts that we didn't know, 50 years ago about.
Yeah.
And we do know a lot about stream ecology nowadays as it relates to flow. So we'll be looking at not just the flow magnitude, but the frequency, high flow events, flood events even, if that gets out to your wetlands and off-channel stuff. Seasonality of the flows, a lot of big storage projects kind of reverse the hydrology, store the high flows, release it during low flows. Turn hydrograph upside down, that has all sorts of potential impacts. So we'll be looking at that. Again, we've got an unregulated river, so it's not an issue, but we want to cover that with good discussion so that this could be a good pilot study for these other regulated rivers.
Okay, so if I could just add one more thing, I guess I'll underscore that gentleman's concern about coming up with specific numbers that will then be used to apply to a very dynamic system where the inputs and the outputs are so variable. I guess that's where my big concern would be, is how this is going to be used, and if that's going to get us in trouble, the end game.
Yeah, again, that's the next step, but you're right, it's a highly variable river. You know, if you set a certain flow level, there's always something that comes along that seems to be an exception, like a drought year.
Yeah.
So sometimes you set a flow number, but then you have a drought year contingency plan, for example. When you have a high flow year, maybe you want to make sure that you take advantage of that and allow more flows down that river. So there's a management component to in-stream flows. It'd be nice if we could manage the in-stream flows, but we've got Mother Nature to deal with. We don't have a big spigot up there to play God with. But certainly all the things you're talking about are important considerations in in-stream flows. The old days are just a flat line minimum flow that only applies in the summer. It just didn't work, it doesn't work.
We have a big challenge ahead of you.
Well, again, unfortunately, Mother Nature's, we got an unregulated river here. One reason this river was selected. If we were looking at below 10 killer, highly regulated water quality, a lot of issues down there would be different.
So can I just keep going on? I have
Sure.
a couple of pages of questions. Stop me if anybody else wants to ask a question. Well,
use one of these eventually, but
yeah. So one thing I'm curious about is that you're looking at in-stream flow programs of all the western states, and so you have the whole west. What about the eastern states that are actually more
I just mentioned that
like?
as an example. I didn't mean that we were only looking at western states.
Oh, okay.
I was just saying, for example,
Okay.
16
That-
of 18 western states.
Yeah, because I mean, this is northeastern Oklahoma. We're more like eastern
I mentioned that
Arkansas.
we know more about the western states because our water laws are a lot more like western state water law than eastern state water.
Okay.
Arkansas, Kansas, Georgia, actually 48 of the 50 states have some type of an in-stream flow program.
Okay.
Exception is Oklahoma and South Dakota.
Okay.
Now, some of the programs are pretty rudimentary or crude. Some are very defined, and these in-stream flows are established as water rights and cast in concrete. Most states have something where they're considered standards or guidelines, planning purpose kind of things, and it really varies on how they're implemented. And that's going to be a challenge down.
I think we've got a comment up here. Is it all right if we come back to you in a minute
Sure,
or two?
yeah.
Great.
Just a question with this gentleman's discussion of the groundwater and the amount of wells and so on, how that affects the in-stream flow. Moving to phase 2, which is the enforcement or whatever, the enforcement of what you find, is that going to adversely affect the amount of well permits and so on?
Again, we don't know because we don't know what this is yet, right? So if this ends up suggesting that we have to more stringently regulate groundwater withdrawals in the Illinois River watershed, then there's going to be a big policy debate over how that gets accomplished and whether that gets accomplished. But right now, we don't even know if that's necessary until we go do this first step. So again, it's premature, I think, to speculate what, if any, regulatory changes are needed, statutory changes are needed, maybe no changes are needed.
Yeah, if we go back to the charts laid out in the 2012 Comprehensive Water Plan, it's really to ascertain the suitability and structure. So that means, should there be a system, and if so, what should it look like? And that is the path we're heading down, trying to analyze that.
Jerry, if we could go back to the water quality subject just a moment. In order to do this complete project, won't you have to now?
It will be a part, there will be some water quality piece, and obviously, water quality, water quantity, biology, ecology, it's all interrelated. And so it will be,
That's why I asked.
yeah, it will be a part of this
Okay,
analysis.
on the water quality, will we go into the metals?
Unknown at this time, but we'll be looking at all of our water quality monitoring data, and if we've got a problem, we'll be looking at it.
I would suggest that you do look at the metals, because you do have a mercury in the water in this part of the state, and it is man-made.
Okay?
Again, I think Forrest hit on this earlier. This is looking at flow-based values, concerns, and issues. So to the extent flow modifications change water quality and vice versa, those are going to be the particular water quality parameters of interest. This is not going to be the study to resolve all water quality problems or challenges in the Illinois River watershed, because we've got a bunch of other studies that have been done and that are ongoing to tackle, phosphorus issues. The joint study that was asked about earlier, and so. But I think to the extent metals have a flow-based component, then they would be a candidate to be included in the data. Yeah.
Question, is there a particular source of mercury in the watershed, or are you just talking atmospheric sources?
No, we have, within 60, 70 miles from this area, we have a number of coal-burning power plants in Arkansas, Kansas, and then we are in the wind shed, or the wind shadow, at the far edge of about 6 coal-burning plants in Texas. So they are depositing. There's been high levels measured in as close as Grand Lake, and we know that we've had some measurements in some area streams. So it is man-made. It is from coal-burning power plants.
Good to know. I'm familiar with mercury in Washington State. I think half of the waters in the northern tier have fish advisory consumption.
So if the mercury is affecting the fish, obviously, it's all interconnected, right?
Okay.
See if this comes out right. It may be a long time from now, or may not ever happen, but when we think of environmental flow, normally we think of, low water issues, not enough water for the fish to stay healthy. Lately, last few years, especially since Arkansas has gone online with their discharge, I'm not seeing the August 1.1 flow and the really, really super low numbers as far as the water flow, since we've got all this input. So I'm wondering if maybe we should also include not only a minimum flow, but also a maximum flow. How much water will the river handle if we get more flow, more water, before it changes everything? Because we all know that low water events change the river. High water events also change the river and the habitat. So shouldn't that be included?
And it will.
Yeah, that's a good demonstration of our second question, how is that going to change over time, so thank you.
Yeah, good point. And that's what Forrest was saying. This isn't just about minimum flows, it's about the entire flow regime.
Yeah, we talked, there's minimum flows, try to avoid that term. It's kind of misleading. We don't use the word maximum flow. We talk about the need for peak flows, meaning more than natural peak. In your case, where flow is augmented from Arkansas, the effect most likely shows up on the lower flow side. Probably doesn't change the river dynamics and gravity. A lot of times augmented flows, and sometimes it's considered a benefit. A lot of times it's just to mitigate or past impacts. We'll try to work the best we can with Arkansas to find out that information.
I was just wanting to know if y'all are going to be working with Check Commission, or are they going to be included in the study or anything like that? Or y'all just going to share data?
we're happy to have the help and assistance of everyone who can help and assist in this certainty. And you saw Tom's name listed as being on the advisory council for us, and now that we're in the pilot study phase, we've kind of got, you know, these types of input meetings from everyone, and then technical resources helping us on the technical side of things, and are definitely open and interested in Cherokee Nation participating in all aspects. Wait, I'm facilitating.
I just write it, you guys answer.
John?
Yes, Bob?
This question would be to JD. One of the events that will really have a huge impact on this entire pilot study would be what's the status, or will the judge ever rule, the federal judge, ever rule on this case of Arkansas versus, or Oklahoma versus certain Arkansas growers? That will have a huge impact on this one.
Maybe.
What's
I don't
your
know.
thoughts?
It could, but I gave up waiting on that decision almost 5 years ago.
No time, you don't have time to.
Oh, no. Now, if you think we have any control over the court system, no way.
Well, but
So,
seriously, should we as citizens can petition to a federal judge to hurry up and make the damn ruling?
well, the judges rule on a writ of mandamus, so I'm not sure how that would
It
work.
takes a lawyer to file that, and for citizens to
Sure.
write to a federal judge.
Get after it. Yes, ma'am.
So could I ask a little bit about, I guess I'm having trouble envisioning exactly what this study is going to entail. So are you going to be out on the river taking samples? How's it going to impact people that live and work on the river, the study itself?
Well, it shouldn't, for the people living in the river, it shouldn't. Will this be done on the river, taking depth and velocity measurements across the river? Now, we've got the boaters coming down, we'll have to deal with them.
You're a good target when you're in the water.
Yeah. I've been warned about them. One of the things we talked about today in our technical group is usually we run a tight rope and a measuring tape across the river so we can get measurements across, know where our station is. We got a bunch of yahoos coming down the rafts. Could be a conflict.
Those Jays put bologna on my table.
I don't think we're talking about clotheslining any floaters.
Yeah.
And no Chinook helicopters.
So we're actually proposing to use a new kind of, not real new, but a technology called acoustic Doppler current profiler that uses an acoustic signal. You pull this little device, it's like on a little surfboard, you pull it across the river, and you can do it in less than 5 minutes, and it'll actually give you depth and velocities all the way across the river. It's really slick. It's actually more accurate than the old-fashioned way, and we should be able to do that without interfering with the boater.
Yeah.
Evening.
Well, let me just put it this way. It should be less intrusive than the thousands of studies that have been done on the Illinois River already over the past 20 years. So the first steps that they talked about are gathering all the data and information that's relevant to this issue that we have already. We have a ton. So then you identify the gaps, and we really just have to spend, I think, a limited amount of time and effort going and filling in the gaps. And that's a great example, too, where the Cherokee Nation is going to be extremely valuable data and information that's being collected by them and by the nation as well. So, but at the end of the day, I mean, we've already had guys out there stretching the ropes and taking measurements and stuff in the past, and so now we already have new technology where we can avoid those more intrusive types of samplings.
Yeah, we'll be pounding some wooden stakes on the bank for surveying, and we'll make sure we check the property.
Not without landowner permission.
We'll get in.
I knew it was next.
Yeah, we shouldn't pick landowners or anybody using the river. Again, if we need access to a certain person, we'll certainly contact them. Most of the areas where we're studying, we'll just access via boat.
We'll do it all on Ed's Range.
I think it's important that the study includes
field, we're at a little higher flow, because in the models, you can simulate flow conditions downward better than you can upward. We'll be getting some increments of low flows as well. So make sure our model covers all those low flows.
There will be other stakeholders in the results, and I'm thinking in particular of downstream, we've got the core-operated Pinchot Lake, which we understand has actually overcommitted the water withdrawal from that lake. So if they have they obviously have a certain minimum water that they're committed to provide to the cities and the other permitted things there. And when it gets to the implementation point, that may be your demand.
Sure. And the Corps is our partner in this study.
Yeah.
It was mentioned earlier that they're funding it. They're actually co-funding it. The Water Resources Board is co-funding as well. So they're definitely plugged into the process, and it does relate. You know, the results do relate heavily to not just how we allocate water through the water rights permitting system, but how they operate. But again, that's a downstream issue, downstream from this study, but as the technical committee apparently talked about this afternoon, something that's certainly important. Rob?
You made the comment that you're doing this study in part in this particular watershed because you have a lot of data. But I'm trying to, I struggle a little bit with the idea that you really don't control all aspects upstream. If you had picked another watershed in Oklahoma, fully in Oklahoma, you wouldn't have had the compact commission involved in this. So I'm trying to figure out how, what's the situation in which you determine that maybe indeed you do need more water in a particular place than Oklahoma is actually authorized to receive through the compact. You see where I'm headed?
Sure. So that's
how do you deal with that?
I agree, and I think that in my view, is the step 2 issue again too. So this pilot study, first step is really just looking at the science, the data, the information, and the flow-based values that exist in this watershed. And they are what they are. We're going to quantify them, get them all down, and see what those flow-based values are, what the flow situation is in the watershed. You know, 2 minus 2 equals whatever, 0, of course. But the 2, I know that basic math. I am an ecologist by background, but I can do some basic math. And then once we come through this process, we have stakeholder input on what the values are of the river, their flow-based, and all the different measurements that have been taken that go into that equation. The next question is, okay, what are we going to do about it? If there is a deficit, if there is a problem, if the system isn't taking care of itself under our existing compact with the state of Arkansas over the allocation of water in the watershed, and if our current system of appropriating water within the state of Oklahoma, within the state of Arkansas, isn't taking care of those needs, then what do we do about it?
Well, but if you'd have chosen a watershed that was fully in Oklahoma, you wouldn't have that concern.
Sure. There are trade-offs in selecting a watershed. I think the key for all the folks involved in our advisory group, our Instream Flow Advisory Group, was that it needed to be in a scenic river watershed because there is unique law in the state of Oklahoma that says thou shalt protect the free-flowing nature of these 6 rivers and streams in our state. And it just so happens that all 6 of them head water in Arkansas. So we couldn't have picked one of those scenic rivers that didn't have some impact influenced by Arkansas. But I can, because I know we've got the Arkansas contingent over here asking the question. And I understand the concern. No. If you're from Texas, it'd be much worse. Okay. Just playing. You're welcome here. But this definitely was not an effort to set out to look at what Arkansas is doing to Oklahoma. I know there's been some of those issues in the past, especially when it comes to water quality issues in this watershed and a number of others. It purely is a situation where we have 6 scenic rivers, where where the statutes say, in particular in these 6, it's in statutory language that we don't have, and that applies to any of the other streams and rivers in the state. We shall protect the free-flowing nature of these streams, and so it's important to start there. And what better watershed to look at recreation, flow-based recreational needs and values than the Illinois River. We don't have a White River, a Buffalo River, some of those things you have over in northern Arkansas. So this is a big one for us. So yes, sir.
Does the statute for scenic rivers allow inclusion of another river? We have 6, but say the Little River in southeast Oklahoma. Can we include other rivers in under Scenic River Act?
Ed will remember there's a process in there for how it can be petitioned, but I think it essentially requires a statutory change because the 6 that we have right now are listed specifically in statute, and so it takes an act of our legislature to add or subtract from that list. Ed, any?
That's correct.
Correct?
Ultimately, legislature's involved. Where a river is located, the citizenry can petition. There's several ways. There's 3 mechanisms to petition. You can have a group of landowners get with the county commissioner. You can have 2 counties get together or a combination of either or and petition the legislature. Then the legislature involves, at that point, the Tourism and Recreation Department and our agency conduct public hearings and to make a recommendation to them, and then they consider the legislation.
All that is spelled out in Title 82, Section 1457. And on, we can provide that to you, but there's
1451 through 1470 is the same.
1451 through 1470. I was close, but not quite. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm thinking a little bit ahead to step 2, but not going there, but just thinking in terms of what you're going to need, what information you're going to need when you get to step 2. And first of all, I think it's important to go ahead and study a river where you do have some problems like the interstate issues, so that you've already addressed those in your study when you get to a point of application. But I'm thinking about the western part of Oklahoma where water's not so abundant, and I don't know if there's any scenic rivers or recreational rivers there at all. So how is this going to apply to that part of the state, and are there stakeholders there that you're going to be talking to? You're going to have a stakeholder input meeting out there somewhere?
Sure, so we won't have any stakeholder meetings out there for the Illinois River pilot study, but one of the goals of this pilot study is to look at the applicability of this process, this methodology elsewhere in the state, whether it's western Oklahoma or whether it's other places in eastern Oklahoma. And so, yeah, I can imagine you certainly would come up with different flow-based values, in some cases no flow-based values, I can imagine in certain parts. Although I don't want to hear any more negative comments about western Oklahoma. That's where I grew up, and yes, we have water-based recreation out there too. But the process itself, this in-stream flow, incremental methodology, IFIM, there are other methodologies out there. We think this is maybe the best one because of the robustness and the ability to really bring stakeholders into the decision-making process. But if it doesn't work here, then we don't want to try it other places. If it works really well here, then we might try it other places. And so kind of the process itself is really important to us to see whether or not we can use that, copy that, make improvements to it as we go look at these issues in other places in the state.
JD, I think that's a terribly important point, though, and it's one those of you in the Instream Flow Advisory Group are familiar with this. Our goal here is not to come up with a flow pattern that works statewide. The results are not going to apply statewide, but the process, our hope is that we're developing a process that would be adaptable to the very diverse stream systems and types of stream systems that we have across the state.
Okay, so the results of your study would be applicable to this river, but the process itself would be applicable statewide. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we hope. Possibly, yes. That's a big lesson we hope to learn from this process, yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I just
site selection, what your description is of that process and the outcome of your site selection.
Well, we're still working on that. We start out at 30,000 feet, look at the aerial photo, look at the river, we make a lot of the gradient profile of the river, and try to see if there are certain areas that seem to be representative of the entire region we're trying to describe.
So does that relate to the site selection? Was mentioned earlier, there was some overlap with sites in the other study. Is there any correlation of those?
Talking about the Barren Fork study?
Or do you
Well, the Barren Fork study
Talking
was,
about Ryan King's study.
oh, I'm not familiar with where he studied it. No reason to overlap with it, but
It won't be intentional, but sometimes the best sites are the best sites. It just happens to be that
So
way.
I just wondered who makes that selection and how that would be selected.
Forrest and his team will make that selection.
And is
there's
that
a process where you go through. You want to make sure that what the section of river you study is representative of the entire region that you're trying to describe. And sometimes you can never find a site that's perfectly representative. So we actually go through and select cross sections on the stream that cover pools, cover riffles, cover runs, different habitat features. And then we do a broader habitat survey of the entire reach and develop ratios of those pool riffle runs. And then we weight the results for that particular site. So bottom line is we want information taken from our study site or sites to be representative of the entire region. There's a process where you go through. Again, you start out at 3,000 feet with your photos. Access is oftentimes an issue. You want to avoid areas around bridges and rip-wrapping, and cause things. You want to be in more natural sections. And it's kind of a process of going through doing that.
Sounds good, thank you.
You want to go down the river with us?
I do.
And we'll take input on that too, though, so give us your input on that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just thinking on the question of who else should be involved, and given the fact that your stakeholder input meeting is conflicting with the mayoral debate for Tahlequah, there might be.
That's Ed's fault. He should have.
I'm just thinking there might be people over there that would really maybe felt torn between going there or coming here. So how do you incorporate the input of those folks who couldn't come to this meeting?
Well, again, email, phone call, written feedback, our website where we'll keep all this information updated and cataloged. So when we have meeting summaries, we'll post it all there on that webpage.
Yeah, but
certainly our phone lines are open. There will be additional stakeholder meetings.
There will be additional stakeholder meetings?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you know somebody in particular, let them know.
Is your presentation going to be available on your website?
We can do that.
Okay.
Yes. Right there. Probably should have told you that right off the bat so you didn't have to take notes furiously. Cole?
There's also information about previous Instream Flow Advisory Work Group meetings and presentations that have been made there on that ISF website.
Yeah, there's a ton of information
There
on your
is.
website. So to be able to sit through and get to the gist of it,
The ISF, it
I
has
think this
them
would be
dated.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll put the most recent stuff at the top usually, and the more dated stuff gets gradually shoved down. So, yes, sir.
Where do you get the funding for this project? And is it just this year for the study? Does it have to be completed by the end of the year?
Well, it's an ongoing source of funding that we have through the Corps of Engineers that comes through their Planning Assistance to States program. And so it's a program that provides funding to help do water planning activities in states. We really were able to do a much better job than we have ever done in the past, thanks to our partners at the Tulsa District Corps of Engineers tapping into this pot of money to do the comprehensive water plan. So over that 5 years comprehensive water plan study process, the Corps of Engineers and this Planning Assistance to States funding was the biggest federal source of funding going into the comprehensive water plan. Since the water plan was completed in 2012, we've been tapping into that funding to do a number of projects that were identified as priority recommendations in the water plan, so we can then take the water plan money and use it for implementation of the recommendations that came out of the water plan. So this is one of those things. John mentioned the big 8 priority recommendations that in the water plan. One of those was in-stream flow. What are we going to do about it in the state of Oklahoma? Does something need to be done? If so, what does it look like? And so that's how we were able to tap that planning assistance to states funding source through the Corps of Engineers to continue this work. And our Water for 2060 Advisory Council, which is another priority recommendation of the water plan, looking at the importance of water conservation, reuse, and recycling. So that's a whole nother effort that we've got ongoing, tapping into this program, as well as demonstration studies of various water conservation and efficiency initiatives in the 12 hotspots that were identified in the comprehensive water plan, which are those areas that are going to face the biggest water challenges in the state. All 12 of them happen to be in western Oklahoma, which is probably no surprise to a lot of people. And so that's another ongoing water plan implementation project that we're using planning assistance to states funding for.
Does it include erosion? You want to include erosion in this plan?
Does this pilot study, look at erosion? It will be looking at sort of at the hydraulics of the system, right? So it'll look at those features.
Are you talking natural erosion or unnatural erosion?
Well, natural erosion, of course, but you were talking about, well, you weren't talking about the hydrology, but this gentleman over here was. Are you trying to get around the question?
No, I can promise you we're not trying to get around the question, maybe just trying to
erosion is a very important.
Sure. It certainly has a big water quality impact, but the effects of, again, this is the effects of flow and things affected by flow.
With over $500,000, you should be able to do a lot to that river. So,
fix the erosion problems in the river?
a lot of things. I mean, erosion should be up towards the top of the list.
It will certainly be a physical aspect of the river system that is looked at in this study, I would imagine, right? The hydraulics, the hydrology.
How it relates to the flow regime. We're not going to solve the erosion problem.
But we certainly have it written down too as one you think is important to make sure.
Pardon me? Just any erosion.
What else?
Yeah, trying to control it a little bit.
Yes, sir.
I really have a concern about how the river rambles and how it seems to move, and the bottom of the river always seems to get shallower and shallower. It's like the gravel, it spreads out. The tendency is for the river at all places to get wider and shallower. And I don't know that it's part of erosion, but to me, that, we might have the same volume flowing, but if it's spread over 1,000 feet rather than 200 feet.
Makes a big difference in whether you're dragging the bottom of your canoe and other things, for sure, right? So that gets the changes over time. Again, John, your second bullet, you're starting to see these types of changes over time that maybe aren't necessarily changes in flow, but changes in the structure of the river that change this flow-based value that you have. Something that can be incorporated in.
Sure, we discussed, sediment, dead-off movement, and erosion of banks. I mean, there's bank erosion that's natural, and good, and then there's the stuff that's man-caused for land use reasons and hard to separate the two. Well, there's a lot of gravel, it's always going to come down, and it's like that's the character of the river. A lot of rivers, maybe this one has issues with bank erosion due to land clearing or cattle, different things.
Flooding.
We're not here to solve those problems, but they do relate to the flow, the high flow regime. It's another ecological flow regime and the importance for that. I mean, keep the river channel at its desired or natural condition.
Well, I think there are implications, though, to the fact that the river does change over time. It does get shallow in places, and then it gets deep in places, and it kind of goes back and forth. It's a meandering stream, and I think that's sort of part of the natural evolution of a stream like this. But I think it's going to have implications in your study results, because if you do your study this year, and you come up with certain in-stream flows that are minimum, that are ideal for a minimum, then that could be different in 5 years because of the
Yeah, not unless there's major changes. The fact that the river goes from left to right and up and down, you know, that's kind of the natural dynamics of the river. So we take we have the representatives study each of the river that we look at. But, you know, maybe that particular site may change, but, you know, one area is going to get deeper, others going to get shallower. Somewhere on the river is going to compensate. So the nature of the river doesn't change over time, just over space it does.
your study will cover enough of an expanse to accommodate for
Yes.
this. Okay.
Now, if you had somebody proposes a dam or builds a dam, knocks those high flows off, the channel narrows, vegetation encroaches, then everything changes. So you can't apply a study pre-dam to a condition that's going to be, the river's going to be in years after the dam is regulating the flow. And there's lots of examples of that out there. And that's not one. I'm sure there's a lot of them here.
Is there any way you use and enjoy the Upper Illinois River that you feel like we don't know about, haven't captured, might miss? Any way that you use or enjoy the Upper Illinois River that we might not know about, we might not, or even if you think we do know about it, it doesn't hurt to make sure. A lot of us ain't from these parts, so.
This probably isn't you, though. Two things. Our group really wants to applaud everyone here for doing this study. I think it's going to be wonderful. I'm a child of Oklahoma. And it's going to be wonderful that we have more science around this very critical part of Oklahoma and our scenic rivers, number one. Number two, back to your point on the usage, our group, we did a survey. We got a little over 1,000 members that recreate in the study area. And our 2012 survey indicated that our members spent over, we're a relatively small group, over 18,000 man-days in the scenic river watershed. And people, they're camping, they're taking their families over to camp, they're canoeing, they're kayaking, and they're fishing. So it's really a very critical part. This whole scenic rivers is a very critical part of our state. And we're so glad that you're doing this study, to get some science around it, to see what you learn from that, and people in this room learn from that going forward to protect it.
Thank you.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because believe it or not, now you are part of the study.
Is he or you have data and information?
Because, yeah, that's exactly. We were talking this afternoon, one of the pieces of information we don't have is camping and recreational fishing hours, harvest rates. We just don't have that much information on that. So
there are a number of very large homesteads fishing groups that would be more than happy to do surveys that are properly designed for your study, like this group.
So Burroughs or, Burroughs from the Wildlife Department or Forest, somebody will be getting with you, but that'd be a great addition. Maybe look forward to that.
Yes.
There's I'm not a member of it, but there's a Tulsa Canoe and Camping Club that makes, that uses the Illinois River a lot.
Northeast Oklahoma, you're right.
Is that what they're
No,
called?
that's a different organization.
That is?
Tulsa Canoe and Camping Club is a different organization.
Okay.
I think I have a contact number. I'll see and provide it.
Take all that we can get for sure. Yes, sir.
The Wildlife Department a couple of years ago did some studies on smallmouth bass remediation in this and surrounding watersheds. You could provide me some.
Yeah, that'll be incorporated. They're on our technical team too, so we'll make sure we've got that plugged in, right?
And then, right, Jim?
I'm sure you were.
We talked about it earlier today a little bit.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, we want to make sure we capture that. What else? Yes?
A lot of people, especially tribal people, gather plants on the river, and the river cane stands, that river cane is a protected species by the Cherokee Nation, so although fish populations are certainly part of that, plants I would think would be something you'd want to focus on too.
We talked about that this afternoon too. Cultural resources are critically important in this part of the world, and we want to make sure those cultural resources are somehow captured, at least the piece that is flow dependent. And so how do you weave that in? So we'd really like to have that information. Things like, crayfish are important, river cane is important, and how do you get some of those medicinal plants in the riparian corridor are important. So as far as those are flood flow dependent, we need that information. So make sure Elkins calls us, or you can.
I think he's calling me right now.
He's dialing it up already. Yes?
You might visit with the scuba dive shops in Tennessee. I believe my perception is that the quality of scuba diving in Lake Tennessee has declined because the water quality has declined in Lake Tennessee. I know it has. That's where I learned to dive, and I still dive occasionally in the lake. But you might check with those operators, get the numbers, because they are big shareholders, and they spend big dollars, and they really appreciate good quality water in Tennessee, and it has gone down in the last 20, 30 years, quality.
Good.
You know that.
One of the
So
one of the things we hear a lot of, at least back in Oklahoma City, is also concerns regarding existing water rights, people that currently use rivers, streams, lakes, and again, it's kind of limited in this particular watershed, but use them already for you've got rural water districts, cities, towns, all throughout this watershed that rely on them for drinking water, for some irrigation. You've got nurseries, some pretty big nurseries in this part of the world. Are there any folks that have sort of those issues, those concerns? Obviously, we talked about the fact that we intend to catalog existing water rights and impacts that may relate to existing consumptive uses of water. Anybody have anything along those lines they want to share here as well? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is how do you know who's using how much already? So how do you establish your baseline?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we have good estimates for, I say good, decent estimates for non-permitted uses of water. Those uses of water that aren't required to have a permit, so small domestic uses in the watersheds that we can sort of build in those estimates, and then we have those that we've issued permits for. We obviously know the amounts where they're diverting water, their annual water use reports that tell us how much they're consuming. So we have that kind of data information, all of which will plug into this.
So I have a water well, and I guess I wonder how any kind of future implications would affect the groundwater in my particular water well, because everybody's water wells are different depths. The older ones are, some are more shallow than others.
Okay. Specifically impacts to existing groundwater?
Impacts to groundwater use and individual water wells.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I don't think it's directly involved exactly with what you're doing, but if you're talking about the stakeholders, you want to keep in mind the landowners that are along the river, and the recreational use takes a real toll on a gravel bar that's destroyed every summer. So you have to keep in mind the landowners as well as the recreational.
additional input that we're looking for as well. Anybody else in particular should be involved that we've missed, please let us know that. Yes, sir.
When you talk about your surface water, this groundwater, is your study going to include all the tributaries, aquifers, and everything that run into the river?
Yes.
We're not gonna come up with flow recommendations for any of the tributaries except Thing Creek and Fairfield. We're not gonna do site-specific studies.
You're not going to do the larger
It'll
tributaries?
be reviewed in the overall watershed.
But we will look at all the data and information that we have on flows and hydrology and water quality and these other things that we have on all the tributaries. It's a look at the watershed above 10 kilo. Yes.
Is there a method in place that prioritizes water use? I guess my thinking is if we're looking at a time frame that goes out to 2060, and with the implications of climate change, I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but I mean, there could come a point in the not too distant future when recreation and fishing becomes kind of a moot point. It come down to survival. Water quantity for survival.
Sure. Again, I think that's a step 2 kind of analysis, but certainly, there's different states handle water uses differently. The state of Oklahoma is a state that does not have a priority of use. It's a priority based on time. Whoever files for their permit first has the more senior water right, and this is on surface water, not groundwater. So, I think that question and many others will have to be answered after we have some results from this process. We have results. Here's what it says. Now, what does that mean within the context of Oklahoma's existing system of allocating water? Is it meaningful that we don't have priorities of use in Oklahoma, or is it not? But we certainly have projections in the comprehensive water plan. You'll see them summarized in the executive report. And I see we're out of the planning region reports for this particular part of the state, the Lower Arkansas Watershed Planning Report, which has even more details on it. But we have projections for water use through 2060 for the various categories of water users in this watershed, and as well as the existing water supplies, kind of a overarching budget, if you will, of supply versus demand. Where do we expect to see shortages, challenges, and those things are analyzed fairly well in the comprehensive water plan.
And JD, those reports, usually those regional reports is on the Waterworks website. It's that without the ISF. If you go to the comprehensive water plan page, you'll see those are listed there under the regional reports.
Yeah. Well, we'd be happy to send them to you if you want them.
If you just put in OCWP where that ISF is, you get to the comprehensive water plan page.
So one of the other things we mentioned, and I know we've got some folks from outside the watershed here. There's some folks from Brook and Bow, for example, another area that I like to float and trout fish. So do we have any issues we haven't captured, people that should be involved, issues that we need to make sure that we try to take a look at in the context of this watershed that may have applicability other places? May not be, I'm just trying to elicit as much response as I can before we turn you all away, even though I do have a 3-hour drive ahead.
Other watersheds certainly will have much greater consumption by industrial and municipal users.
It could. Some have less.
Others will.
That Upper Mountain Fork, Scenic River watershed, probably has actually less than the Illinois River watershed in terms of
Yeah,
water
but
rights and consumption of water.
I thought you were spreading out beyond the scenic
Yeah.
rivers into all of the
You're right.
rivers.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. After we get outside the context of the scenic rivers, we'll probably see more developed basins, have a lot more users. We'll definitely get into basins where we have a reservoir upstream that controls the flow more than Mother Nature, right? Just like you have below 10 killer here.
The Arkansas will be, yeah.
Arkansas, the challenge of doing this on the Arkansas River didn't cross our mind. That's why we decided we don't want to start there for sure. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, JD, I'm not from the watershed. I'm from the Combahee Basin, actually. But my thought is I really like the input from the others here as far as surveying the recreational users and reaching out to those who have the businesses and who are involved in that industry, reaching out for them to get a feel on how people are actually using the water in the basin. I think that's really great, and if that could be incorporated somehow into the in-stream flow program, if it's just forms you send or you hand out for people to fill out and hand back in, something as simple as that could yield a lot of data and a lot of input for people and make citizens feel like they're actually a part of this process.
I think it'd be good to send that to landowners along the river too. I think Ed has addresses for most of them, don't you, Ed? Or at least the ones that are registered to vote.
Because I see that as a real challenge to get out there when you go into basins that don't have as many people, maybe not as high as a recreational use as some others. Might be more of a challenge to fish that information out.
Good. Yes.
Are there any other states that are, this is federal, Corps of Engineers, are there other states that are doing
Not
similar?
actually here, I'd ask the state, it's kind of coordinating
I see.
the charge here, but.
Are there other states that are pursuing these?
Yeah, as Forrest mentioned, 48 out of 50 states have some sort of in-stream flow type program. And again, I'm more familiar with the western states ones. 16 of the 18 western states have in-stream flow programs, all of them different. And they're all of them different because all of those states have typically a little bit different way of managing water rights and allocating water. And so whatever you come up with, you got to also try to marry it with your existing system for how you allocate water in your state. And so that's what gives a lot of these things a little bit different flavor and a little bit different twist. Some of them are very simple, some of them are very complicated. Some have a lot more resources that they're able to use to implement something very complicated. Some don't have to have something that's really simple and easy to administer. So all of those things are kind of factors that come into play again when you kind of get to step 2, right? Now we know what we know and what it looks like, at least in the Illinois River watershed. Now what does that mean for law, regulation, policy, and how does that fit within our existing framework of allocating water in the state? Yes?
I just want to make sure, earlier I think I heard you mention other recreational things besides just floating, like hunting and bird watching, and so those other recreational things are included as well in your study, right?
Any of those that have a flow-based attachment to them, for sure, we want to make sure.
Well, I mean, because your wildlife and your birds have might not be real apparent, but there's a flow-based attachment there. So.
Question, does our Department of Tourism have any data relative to the economic value?
Yeah, I know they do on a statewide basis. We just need to make sure we ask them for what they've got that relates to this.
We're going to start with the Tracy Boyer study on the Illinois River Recreation Study and see what that provides and then branch out from there.
Is tourism part of the study group, your study group too?
They are not, but we certainly can reach out with them, and that's a good point for anybody out there.
Yeah, there are probably going to be many people that don't necessarily have technical expertise on how you look at in-stream flows in a system, but are good sources of data for us. And so any ideas you have about that, let us know too. So we can be sure to reach out to them. Yeah.
Isn't tourism on our advisory?
They are a member of the Instream Flow Advisory Council, yes. Good point. I think Tom Kreider with State Parks is our advisory council member. Yep.
Point of information, what's the similarity between this pilot study on the Illinois Basin and the large funded study that the U.S. Geological Survey is going to do on the Red River Basin? That is a multi-state study on quality and quantity and hydrology. Is there similarity?
Well, I mean, I don't know. First of all, that's focused on the Red River, so it's completely out of this watershed, number one. So there's no overlap.
No.
Number two, I'm not sure that comprehensive Red River study that you're referring to, if it does ultimately get funded and completed, we'll look at specifically focusing on in-stream flow type issues, fishing and recreation as much as that. But again, I don't know for sure. Something we need to kind of go back and think about and look at. I don't know the answer right. What else? We milked it for all she's worth.
I've got one last leading question. I understand.
Just leave it alone.
I've heard through the grapevine. Well, I haven't heard through the grapevine. I've seen plans and stuff for water developments in the upper end of the watershed. And I don't know if those are going to be consumptive developments, water recreation developments. I really don't know too much other than rumor, gossip, and innuendo. I know Steve's been involved in that, I think, Delia, you have too. I don't know how much of that upstream water recreation development change. I mean, this is kind of predicated on what we know today. But is there going to be a new big recreational interest in the watershed that we might need to be aware of? A recreational need.
Sound Springs, there is in Arkansas.
It's just in Arkansas, not in Oklahoma.
On this, it's going to be on the Oklahoma side. Big splash.
I don't know.
The old Francis Lake.
Yeah,
Stuff.
it's been talked about. It's been talked about that.
Okay, so it's talk, it's talk. Okay. Good enough.
Isn't that right?
That's why I was trying to, hopefully maybe we cut off from this for a while, because when this gets out there, people are thinking, the permits will become valuable.
Well, that's one of the reasons I brought it up, because if the water need changes significantly, that could change the whole focus and whole flavor of this study. Just didn't know. Okay.
That it? Okay. Thank you all very much for your time. Please stay in touch. And let us know where you're going.